Why did the Civil War happen? Welcome to another mini lesson. This for online U.S. history students and regular U.S. history students and anybody who might be interested on the internet. So why did the Civil War happen? It's just a brief primer. And of course, when we're talking about the Civil War, we are not talking about that Civil War. As much as that was a great movie and Robert Downey Jr. is an absolute king. We are not talking about that movie. We are talking about this. We are talking about the war that led to thousands of dead, that led to hundreds of thousands injured and permanently affected, that impacted millions of people's lives. We are talking about that Civil War. And we are talking about a Civil War that we didn't have really motion picture cameras for. We had still cameras, and later in other videos we might take a look at some of those still images. But for this, we have this lovely drawing. So just so you know kind of what we're talking about, if you've never studied the Civil War before, this is basically the map, the breakdown of the states. The blue states are the states that remained with the Union. The red states are the Confederate states. Now, they seceded in kind of two waves. There was the bulk of them that seceded first, and then Virginia, and I think it was North Carolina and maybe Tennessee, did not secede at first. They were sort of waiting. And what ended up happening was the attack on Fort Sumter. And after that, Lincoln called for volunteers to come and help bring the rebellious states back into the Union. Lincoln was very careful to never call them the Confederacy. And Virginia viewed that as a hostile action and thus joined in the Confederate States. What's interesting is that prior to Virginia seceding, President Lincoln had offered command of the Union Army to Robert E. Lee, and Lee was considering it when he went home to Virginia. And at that point, Virginia seceded, and Lee decided to go with his home state. And then the sort of red and blue stripy states, they call those the border states on the map. These were maybe not the most loyal states, but none of them seceded from the Union, although some of them definitely tried. Kentucky and Missouri had to have martial law imposed. Martial law, of course, ruled by the military. And Maryland actually, Lincoln actually ended up jailing members of their legislature to keep them from seceding. Because Maryland, of course, is the other half of Washington, D.C. And had Maryland seceded, they would have had to move the nation's capital. And that's not like something you just do on a whim. So it was very important that Maryland remain on the fold, even though Maryland was certainly a slave state and had certainly ties to the Confederacy, to be sure. All right, so what was the cause of the Civil War? It was, of course, slavery. Any other cause you can name, the root of it goes back to the issue of slavery. And of course, when we're talking about slavery, we're talking about things like this. A mother being sold away from her child. This was not supposed to happen in most states. Most states had laws against it, but it still happened all the time. And sometimes the laws were phrased such that it was could only happen if the children were of a certain age. Well, yes, of course, that makes it less traumatic. So, yeah, they still were selling families apart from each other. It was very common for fathers to be sold away, but oftentimes even mothers were sold away from their children. And this actually becomes a worldwide symbol. I think this was actually from when the British were abolishing slavery. But if you can't read the kind of banner underneath the gentleman kneeling, it says, "Am I not a man and a brother?" Just a very powerful image. And the United States was actually one of the last countries to abolish its slavery. Britain and France and other European countries had done so years before. France did it and then brought it back and then abolished it again. Britain abolished it, I think it was about 30 years before the United States did. Okay, so let's say you don't believe me. I'm a hippie, liberal teacher. I was educated in Missoula. I'm a commie, pinko, whatever. Union thug. And so let's say you don't believe me. Well, let's hear it from the Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens. And he says, our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. Boom. Vice President of the Confederacy, right there, saying it out loud. Incidentally, this was in his inaugural address, which I think was given before the Georgia legislature. The Confederacy didn't exactly have institutions and places where it did its business necessarily. So I'm almost positive Stephens gave that in front of the Georgia legislature. But let's say that's not enough for you. Let's say you want to hear something from a religious person. Henry James Thornwell of the Presbyterian Church says the following: the antagonism of Northern and Southern sentiment on the subject of slavery lies at the root of all the difficulties which have resulted in the dismemberment of the Federal Union and involved us in the horrors of an unnatural war. It's right there. I forgot to put a quotation mark at the end, but it's right there. Antagonism of Northern and Southern sentiment on the subject of slavery. So, yeah, the fight about slavery. So let's say that's even not enough for you. You want to hear from the states themselves. They all wrote secession documents. They all wrote basically little declarations of independence that outlined why they were seceding from the Federal Union. Here's Georgia's. The people of Georgia, having dissolved their political connection with the government of the United States of America, present to their Confederates and the world the causes which have led to the separation. So, they're explaining. And here are the causes. For the last 10 years, we have had numerous and serious causes of complaint against our non-slave holding Confederate states with reference to the subject of African slavery. Right there. First cause. Most important cause. If they put it first, that's what people are listening for. After that, they don't listen anymore. Why would they? It's a fairly boring document. So yeah, Georgia saying it right there. How about Mississippi? In the momentous step which our state has taken of dissolving its connection with the government of which we so long formed a part, it is but just that we should declare the prominent reasons which have induced our course. Declare those prominent reasons, Mississippi, right here. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce of the earth. There we go. Now, they're couching it in some economic terms. They're saying that slavery is essentially the basis of their economy, and they were right. Cotton was only profitable with slave labor. Once you have to start paying the labor force, you're not making nearly as much money. Possibly not making any money at all. Because even though cotton production had gone up, the price of it was depressed because there was so much cotton in the international market, thanks to production from the United States and other places, that cotton, you had to grow a bunch of it to make any money off of it. And in order to grow a bunch of it, you had to have slave labor if you were going to be profitable. And then one more, Virginia, one of the last states to secede. Virginia says the following: the people of Virginia, in their ratification of the Constitution of the United States of America, adopted by them in convention on the 25th day of June in the year of our Lord, 1788, having declared that the powers granted under said Constitution were derived from the people of the United States, and might be resumed whensoever the same should be perverted to their injury and oppression, and the federal government having perverted said powers not only to the injury of the people of Virginia, but to the oppression of the southern slave-holding states. So even Virginia, who was more genteel about it, still is bringing up slavery right there in the first paragraph of the document. Very easy to spot in those three documents. So I bring my receipts when I tell you that slavery was the cause of the war. I bring my receipts and I explain to you why that is so. Now, some historians might say that the war was about states' rights. You'll hear that from predominantly Southern historians, were the sort of basis of this. In the aftermath of Reconstruction, those Southern historians wanted to make the South seem more noble than it was in all of this. And they, in order to do that, they couldn't admit that they had seceded because of slavery, because slavery was wrong. So they had to couch it in other terms, and so they came up with this states' rights argument that they were trying to protect their autonomy in the federal union on any number of issues. But in the end analysis, most of them come back to slavery. So I say a state's right to what? To keep and own slaves. Just plain and simple. That is what it comes down to. You might also hear that this was about industry versus agriculture. Okay. An agricultural system based on what? Based on free slave labor, frankly. Industry was happening in the North where they paid their workers. And by the way, factory owners were still making money hand over fist, even though they were paying their workers. Granted, they weren't paying their workers probably enough, but they were paying their workers and still making gobs of money. Why couldn't the South do the same thing? Again, free slave labor made their products really, really profitable. Okay, so that is the end of our slideshow. I do want to share with you one last thing, which is our journal topic for the day. Our mini lesson journal topic is 2 parts. Number 1, I want you to describe the primary causes of the Civil War. And number 2, do you think that the Union could have continued if it had still been divided by slavery? Why or why not? That's your journal topic. Please respond to that in the journal assignment right under this video on the Moodle course page. And we will see you next week. Thank you. Make sure to get all your work done. This is your last week to work on it. Yay.